Thank you so much for being here on the first session of our mental health speaker series. It's being hosted by the LA County Asian American Employees Association. And our guest speaker today is the esteemed Dr. Derek Shea. He's from the LA County Department of Mental Health, and he's brought some very helpful information for us that we can all use in our daily life. So I just want to quickly address what's been happening lately, because there's so many things happening on the news. There was the shooting at the Taiwanese church. There's that supermarket shooting, and then just yesterday there was a mass shooting at a Texas elementary school. So I think these things all affect us to some level, whether we're consciously aware of it or not. So I think it's really important for us to have more conversations about mental health, and we want to help open up this dialogue, especially for the Asian American communities, and just let people know it's okay to talk about mental health. So I hope at the end of this session, you'll be leaving with some useful information that you can all incorporate into your personal lives. And let me make a few housekeeping announcements before we start. So the session is gonna be an hour and a half. We have 30 minutes at the end for questions. So you can ask questions by typing them into the chat throughout the presentation, and then we'll answer them at the end. If you have trouble doing that, you can just unmute and ask out loud during the last half hour. So the session is being recorded. However, we're not going to be recording the question, the last 30 minutes of question. So if you want to get a little personal, you can. And then we're going to be putting the video out on our YouTube channel. So if you have family and friends that can't make it tonight but want to listen to it another time, they can. Just tell them to go to our YouTube channel, and then we'll also email out a link later. So, and then one last thing, we're gonna be sending out a survey after tonight to kind of get a better idea of what kind of topics people want to listen to, so that we can work on getting that information to you in some of our future sessions. So that's it. And let me introduce Dr. Shit. Okay, Dr. Shit, Derek Shit, is the mental health clinical program head of the LA County Department of Mental Health, Long Beach Asian Pacific Islander Family Mental Health Center. In addition to serving the AAPI communities for many years, he managed the psychiatric mobile response team in LA County that responds to mental health crisis in the community. And he also provided consultation and assistance to law enforcement agencies in crisis negotiation with barricaded suspects and hostage situations. He is passionate about suicide prevention, and he is an authorized assessing and managing suicide risk trainer for the Suicide Prevention Resource Center and LA County Department of Mental Health. He facilitates the clergy roundtable meetings to promote interfaith and mental health dialogue. He served as a volunteer on national and international deployments with the Red Cross and Zuchi Foundation to provide disaster mental health services, and published many peer-reviewed articles in leading journals and psychiatry, in leading journals in psychiatry, psychology, and social work on topics related to adolescent antisocial behavior, diagnosis, and clinical judgment. So without further ado, I'm gonna let Dr. Shit take it away. Go ahead.
Thank you, Winnie, for that long introduction. Mostly thank you to all of you who are, taking time out of your very busy schedule to join me for this presentation, on the happiness cocktail and other practices for well-being. I believe, as Winnie mentioned, we are all still grappling with the heartbreaking news about the shooting at Robb Elementary School in Texas yesterday, in which 19 children and 2 teachers were killed by the gunmen. While we're still learning more about the motives and for the law enforcement to piece together the information about why all this took place, I think this is really on top of the other recent shootings, mass shootings that you alluded to in Buffalo, New York, and also, right after that at Laguna Woods at the Taiwanese church in Irvine, Taiwanese church, and which are both racially motivated. I think that this is all just within the last 10 days, and we're still just digesting that, and this happens. I think it's fair to say that, especially in this last 2 years, it's being particularly stressful for all of us, starting with the pandemic, right, and then with the social unrest following the killing of George Floyd, and then with all the increase in hate crimes, especially toward the AAPI community. Right. So these are just some of the things in the background on top of all the day-to-day other things, stresses that we deal with, such as the conflicts that we may have at home, the stresses at work, school, etc. Right. And I think Belinda is showing the PowerPoint too, right? So if you can actually move along, actually, because we're going to move along. Can you go down the slides? Yeah, so these are just a few images of some of the things that I think really is being affecting us. This is just only a few of the things. And then if you can continue to go down the slides. So as I said, even for the some of the common stressors, I think many of you are, members of the API community. I think you can probably relate to some of the common stresses too, such as family conflict that can be a result of some of the acculturation differences across generations, right? And in many families are even these communication and language barrier within the family. And a lot of times, because the parents may be immigrants, I think the general, as we know, that majority of the AAPI individuals living in the US are foreign born, about 59% of them, and many of immigrants. And so by virtue of that, a lot of the, for example, the parents might be immigrants and the children might be born here, or they are here from a very young age. So it's very common that sometimes that maybe there's these cultural differences and sometimes even role reversals, right? The kids may be more familiar with the language, with the system, and sometimes even being the one that have to help the parents to navigate through certain things. So some of these create some challenges, and not to mention that there's also cultural differences in how affection may be expressed and parenting practices that can also contribute to some of the conflicts at home, right? For example, my mom would probably never tell me that, Derek, I love you, okay? But she may cook these very delicious, meals and soups for me. And even, she's old, and because I'm old, right? So she has aches and pains, and yet she's standing there and cooking a delicious meal whenever I go over. And I know that's really, she's really telling me that she loves me, right? So I can read that language of love, but the kids may be born and growing up here may not be able to read that, right? So because here they're used to seeing their friends maybe at school that, their parents are telling them, hey, I love you. And they're hugging them, they're being so affectionate. And, and if these young kids' parents are cooking these meals for them, I don't want to eat that. I don't care about that. And maybe they don't feel that they're even being understood by their parents, what they really care about. The parents are not paying attention. They're just focusing on, you need to do well at school, or you need to do this. And again, it's quite common. I'm not saying that this happens in all the families, but quite common that a lot of the children in those kind of situation, part of it, as I said, brought about by some of these cultural differences, may not feel understood, may not feel accepted, or emotionally supported, right? And some of the parents may not even be able to be in a position to help the kids with their schoolwork, right? And even some of these concrete help, and some are able to. But again, just that these potential conflicts arising from some of these social cultural context of the acculturation differences. Another common stressor is, as many of you know, that in the API community, that there's a lot of value placed on education, in terms of school and work performance, for example, right? So in many ways, these high expectations of achievement can also have these potential side effects of there's often a lot of shame and feeling of disappointment around these sort of quote unquote failed expectations, both for the children as well as even for everyone involved in the family, right? And when I put quote unquote parental, I think many of us who are from the Asian culture and Asian descent, we probably can relate to that some of these high expectations are also internalized within us, right? So we are also have very high expectation of ourselves, which just can also create a lot of stress for ourselves as well, right? So I think, if we go to the next slide, so let me just briefly talk about, stress, simply put, these some of the things that we just talked about, these different stressors, again, can create a feeling of emotional or physical tension, which simply put, it's a feeling of emotion or physical tension, and which can come from being in stressful situations or stressful thoughts, right? That can make us feel frustrated or angry or nervous. So again, I think we know that stress is not always bad, right? It can actually, having some stress can be very helpful to help us stay focused, maybe accomplish, important tasks. And but having too much stress or having chronic stress can be a real problem. And I really like the picture here I just took from the National Institute of Health on the website, where they simply use the picture to define anxiety, which is stress that continues after the stressor is gone, which I think that is a really good way to describe that. And let's go to the next slide. So briefly, that's a review, just the common or the three general types of stress. There's the acute stress, which happens when, let's say, we're in a sudden dangerous situation, within a short period of time. Let's say an example might be that we just experienced a near accident, or just, or we're being chased by a dog or somewhere, and we're just running away. And again, these are kind of acute stress in a sudden situation within a short period of time, right? And then there's also the chronic stress, which happens when we have more of an ongoing situation that causes frustration or anxiety. Let's say if we have a very frustrating job, or if you have a difficult boss, or you've had chronic illness, right? These are situations that are usually not going away within a very short period of time. So that's something that's chronic stress. And there's also the traumatic stress, which happens when you experience or witness a life-threatening or a very highly distressful situation, such as a natural disaster or man-made disasters, such as war, such as school shooting that we're talking about, or sexual assault. Again, these type of traumatic events can also create stress in our body and mind. And again, all these are sort of normal, sort of how our body will respond in these situations. And if we go back to the previous slide earlier, 2 slides ahead, just one more. Yeah. So what do you think most of these stressors are? What type of stress do you think these creates? Feel free to unmute yourself or put in the chat room. The pandemic, is it an acute stress, or is it a chronic stress or traumatic stress? I mean, what do you think based on that definition we just reviewed? Anyone?
It could be chronic.
Okay, yeah, right? Because the pandemic is not going away. It is actually just still there. And it's something that goes on for quite some time. Same thing was with discrimination and hate crimes. I would say the family conflict and work and school performance, stresses, etc. All these are essentially chronic stress. And I think that as we will talk about that a little bit more, our human body is designed to respond to stress, but we're pretty good at acute stress, but we're not so good at chronic stress by design. Okay, so we can actually go down to the other slides. So here on this slide, I'll just want to also sort of share a little bit about sort of this vicarious trauma and stress, and which is another type of stress that people may experience but may not be as aware. I work in the mental health field and deal with a lot of trauma, and particularly in our clinic, we specialize working with the API population. And because we're located in Long Beach, many of you know Long Beach has the largest Cambodian population outside of Cambodia. And early on, there were a lot of Cambodian refugees that after the genocide in Cambodia, where the Khmer Rouge essentially responsible for the killing of a third of their country's population, right, over a period of 4 years. And so many people, and they had published a journal article in the Journal of American Medical Association, for example, in I think around year 2005, and where they have studied a representative sample of Cambodian residents living in Long Beach, adults who went through the war. And roughly about, they have 99% of them, these Cambodian adults living in Long Beach, experienced near death due to starvation. About 95% experienced lost a loved one due to murder. And I think around, I don't have the slides here, but I can, just recall from my memory, but around, I think about 85% of them have, I'm sorry, without giving you round percentages, but I'd say a very high percentage, I think it was maybe around 70 to 80% of them have, again, lost the loved one being persecuted. And about 55% of them actually experienced torture themselves. So this is a population that experienced a lot of trauma. And so I think their rates of PTSD is about, I apologize, I should have the slide in front of me, or I should have put it in if I'm going to talk about it. But I think the rate of PTSD is about 65% compared to about 2.5% in the general US population. So you can see the extent of a trauma that population experienced. Now, one time when we were in this meeting with the community members, leaders in the Cambodian community, and then Dr. Malika, who is a researcher from Harvard who have studied refugee trauma for many, many decades. And so he was here in Long Beach to share with us and talk. And right after the talk, he made a comment, and he said, when people have empathy, when they're responding in a very empathic way, they're really absorbing another person's pain and suffering. And I thought that was a very powerful statement from somebody who studied trauma for decades. And I think that very much so. And then also other research have studied the phenomena of vicarious trauma, or what's also known as the secondary traumatic stress. And oftentimes you see that a lot in, for example, first responders like police and fire, when they see all these gruesome scenes, when they arrive on scene and they see all these, they have these experience a lot of traumatic stress reactions. And sometimes we used to do some of these debriefings and support to help people like the respondent maybe to 9/11, for example, and many people can experience these secondary trauma stress reactions. And people in the mental health field and other people who deal with other people's trauma or really difficult experiences, right? And not realizing sometimes that we are also absorbing a lot of their stress and suffering into our body and mind. And I would say that a lot of times that people don't realize when we sort of overconsume the news, right? Because what's on the news, often there's a lot of really, really difficult things to see. Oftentimes what really is more capturing people's attentions are the really very tragic and very difficult traumatic kind of news. And sometimes when we are watching a lot of that repeatedly, we're also absorbing a lot of that stress and that trauma and traumatic stress into our bodies and mind as well. And I think it's important to point out that the impact of stress on the body and mind is accumulative. Stress is something that accumulates over time, right? So it's usually not just one thing, but when people have a really hard time with something that's stressful, oftentimes it's also, it can be the last straw. It's something that builds one on the other, and it's something that we may accumulate in our body and mind. So for all these reasons, it's really critically important for us to have ways and practice ways to really be able to release some of that negative emotional energy, the stress, the tension, and then just to have some ways to sort of care for and nurture our body and our mind. Okay, and then you can go to the next slide, please. So let me just very briefly review our human nervous system, right? And many of you remember this from your college days in biology, and you learn about that in our central nervous system, there's sort of two main parts. There's the sympathetic nervous system, which is sort of, responsible for, in some ways, that fight or flight response, right? To kind of gear our body up to respond to something that is important for us. Again, oftentimes it will increase our heart rate. It will make our breathing a little faster. It pumps the blood and gets us to have that energy to get our adrenaline going, for example, again, to respond to something we really urgently we need to respond. So by design, that's helpful for our survival, for our body to be able to do that, right? And during that time, our digestion may go down. We won't digest food as much, and our actually immune system will decrease a little bit so that we can actually tolerate things in order to have the energy to respond to the crisis. Now, the other piece of our central nervous system is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for that rest and relaxation response, right? After the our body gets geared up like that, it's very important for the body to be able to relax and to sort of rest, and for us to be able to digest again, for us to kind of restore to that equilibrium, to be able to do that part, right? So that's that part of the nervous system. A lot of these happen outside of our conscious awareness. It just sort of happen naturally. There's most of these we don't really have a whole lot of control. We can't control our heart rate usually. We can't control our blood pressure, right? Sometimes we can control our breathing a little bit, but again, most of it we can't really control. So next slide, please. So when we experience trauma and stress, it has an impact on us, and oftentimes what it does is that it generates sort of like an overactive sympathetic nervous system. Like for most of us, I would say in our modern day and age, most of us living this state of an overactive sympathetic nervous system, right? Because we talked about this is sort of the fight and flight response. Again, during this when this part of the nervous system is activated, it releases more stress hormone, the cortisol, adrenaline, for example. It also makes us more anxious. When this is more activated, make us more irritable, make it more difficult for us to sleep, to digest food, make us more tired. And as I mentioned, it also affects our immune system. It amplifies the sensation of pain. It affects our mood, and it dampen our feeling of happiness. It just kind of make us, it has this impact, right? But, in many ways, as I said, this is very important for our survival. So like like maybe in our prehistoric times, maybe if we're, let's say, dealing with we're trying to run away from a tiger or a lion, our body, and we need all that in order to survive. We need to run away, right? We need to fight. In order to survive, and our body, this is helping us to do that. But I think this day and age, we don't usually deal with lions and tigers as much, but we deal with the stress coming from, for example, a work deadline, for example, conflicts at home, as we talked about earlier, for example, the pandemic or hate crimes and all these things that's happening, right? And sort of still put us in a sort of the state of being on guard. We're sort of in this a state where our sympathetic nervous system is still activated, and and it has these impact on us, and when scholars, when they do research relates to stress, when we look at our biology, and there's a part of our endocrine system, our brain, for example, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is the part of the brain and the endocrine system that is particularly activated or particularly involved in situation of stress, as well as resilience factors during that time. This particular area is very closely related to that response. Now, studies have found that the dysregulation in this HPA axis is linked to a lot of the common mental disorders, such as depressive disorder, anxiety disorder, and burnout, right? And when we talk about this dysregulation, we're generally referring to, and as some of the research also talk about this measure of this dysregulation, HRV. Basically, it's this, overactive sympathetic nervous system and underactive parasympathetic nervous system, right? Again, the state that we're talking about, most of us are in, right? Where we're a little bit more, we're kind of this like a car engine that's always running. Like you're hearing the engine running, but it's not really stopping. It's not resting, right? In that constant state, in that chronic state. And as I mentioned earlier, we're better at dealing with acute stress, but when it's chronic stress, this is often the state that our body gets. We're trying to survive, we're trying to help us to survive, but then it's actually taking a toll on our body and our mind, right? So it's very important that we are aware of this and have a way to deal with this. So next slide, please. So this is just a comic cartoon, I think, but I think it illustrates this phenomenon that's related, and this is sort of the negativity bias that we as humans have, right? Because I think from an evolutionary perspective, we are built to respond to threats in the environment. Our nervous system is built for that, right? We're going to be highly attentive to any signals of threat, right? Those that are able to do that, they are more likely to survive and pass on their genes, right? So by design, we are wired. We are wired toward paying more attention to the things that maybe are potentially wrong or that are not going well, that is a problem, right? So like in whether your work in mental health or many other fields, you probably can relate to that. We are focused a little bit more on the problems. We that's what we spend more time on, right? And obviously the news is the same too, right? Usually it's less frequent they report on all the good things. Usually most of the news are about the problems and the all these things that are potentially a threat. And so this is how we're wired. And I also mentioned earlier that it can really take a toll on us. And it's actually, even though it was helpful for us, from our evolutionary development, in order to get here, but it's also that particular mode is also creating problems for us, because when we have because in some ways this is not only that the stress that we're talking about takes a toll, it affects our immune system, it affects our happiness, it affects in so many ways. But in some ways, it's also not fair, right? Because there's also some of the good things that's going on in our lives, but we don't pay as much attention to that. We tend to, only focus more on the negative parts. We focus on the problems and the things that are wrong, and then we sometimes don't pay the same amount of attention to the good things that are around us, that are also worthy of paying attention to, which can be very nourishing for us, right? But I just wanted to say that it's important to acknowledge that there is this negativity bias for all of us, and that we need to actively and intentionally engage in some of the practices that can help to counter the impact of that, or the tendency for us to do that. Okay, so next slide, please. So now I'm going to get into some of the ways to better activate our parasympathetic nervous system, right? So if you could go back to the last slide, please. Yeah. So no, this is fine. Yeah. So as I said, it's with that background that I just went over. I think it's, I'm going to now start to talk about some of the more practical sides. What do we do? What can we do that could help us? Because this is how we're kind of built. This is how our tendency is, and this is how our body and our nervous system are responding. And we continue to have these chronic stressors that are not going away. And our nervous system is still in that high gear, and some of us may have a hard time even sleeping at night, or all these things that are going on. And we need to have some ways to help us to enhance the other part of the nervous system, to kind of activate and to kind of help us relax, help us to restore, right? And one of the things that can be helpful is simply to do something that's rhythmic, that's repetitive, and some example that might come to mind is some of you may practice Tai Chi, for example, something that's rhythmic, that's repetitive, Qigong, yoga, for example, swimming, again, there's a lot of sort of rhythmic movement, even running, right? Some of you may be runners, and then if you run for a while, you get into that rhythm, and it's rhythmic, and you're moving the body. And even just walking in nature, you're just walking, and there's that rhythmic sense. Even just these slow stretches that you might be able to do, and sometimes even just taking a 5-minute break, like you could actually do some really slow stretches that is sort of rhythmic and repetitive, and that can be very soothing for our nervous system. Yeah. So that's one suggestion. Another suggestion is when we do some slow rhythmic and diaphragmatic breathing, which is basically abdominal breathing, when you're breathing with your stomach. Sometimes we use this also in our field when we work with individuals with that struggle with panic disorders, for example, with a lot of anxiety, or even people dealing with trauma, and sometimes they have a hard time to slow down that response, right? So we may practice that with our clients, and maybe it might be worthwhile for us just to take maybe a minute or two for us just to practice that together. I think that earlier at the beginning, before we started, they share with me it would be good to do something that to practice. So maybe just for that, that's if we could just maybe we can try it together right now. So maybe you can just sit back in your seat, just relax, and just maybe put your hand on your lower stomach, maybe about 1 inch below your belly button. You can just kind of hold your palms on your lower stomach. And you can either open your eyes or close your eyes and just kind of relax for a moment and just sit. And I'd like you to just kind of put your attention on that part of your body where your palms are holding your lower stomach. And I'd like you to just kind of breathe in and out naturally. You should breathe in and out naturally. And I'd like you to notice if you notice any movement on that part of your body. You may notice there may be some movement. And you may notice that when you breathe in, the stomach may rise. As you breathe out, the stomach goes back in. Naturally, there's that movement. As you may notice that movement as you breathe in and out naturally. And I'd like you just to kind of focus on that movement and stay with that movement. As you breathe in, you notice it's rising. And as you breathe out, it goes back in. And again, as you breathe in, it rises. And as you breathe out, you notice it's going back in. And sometimes it may be slow, it's fine, deep, and sometimes it may be shallow and more quick. That's fine too. Again, there's that natural rise and fall of your stomach with each breath as you breathe in and as you breathe out. And I'd like you to just to stay with that movement as you breathe in and as you breathe out naturally. There's that natural rhythm. It's almost like that ocean wave. It rises and it falls naturally with each breath. And all you have to do is to stay with that movement. When it rises, you know it's rising. When it goes back in, you know it's going back in. Naturally. And there's nothing more important right now than that rise and fall of your stomach with each breath. And if you notice your mind going away, that's fine. You smile and you come back to this rise and fall of your stomach with each breath. It's always there. It's like a friend who's always there. Again, you stay with that rise and fall with each breath naturally. Okay. All right. Okay, so that's just a kind of a brief practice. And sometimes that you may even lay down in your bed if you can't sleep, and you may just kind of notice the rise and fall. It's even easier to notice that rise and fall when you're fully relaxed in your bed. And So feel free to come back but how was that? I don't know if you've sensed anything from that just brief moment of practice, but you may find that as you do more of this practice, the effect will become more evident or more clear. So because even if you cannot fall asleep, let's say, the body will help. It will help the body to relax and get some rest, because it will also help the mind to get some rest, because we have a tendency for our mind to either stay in the past, something that's already happened, and we're kind of stressed about what already happened, right? Or we may be worried about the future. We're thinking about something that hasn't happened and where our mind is getting all worked up. And so this practice is in some ways one of the mindfulness practices, or in some ways a meditation practice, right? Because you're kind of coming back to this moment. You're staying with your body in this present moment. So it helps the mind to take a break from being in the future or being in the past. It helps you. Of course, with any practice, like you practice riding a bike, it's not something you can do immediately, but you'll get better at it over time with practice. So, but the more that you practice, the better you're able to bring yourself back from the past or from the future, and you're kind of staying with the present. It can be very nourishing. It can be very soothing. And it can help you to relax, and helps you to stay in the present. And you can even do this while you're maybe in a work meeting that can be a little stressful. You could actually do this a little bit. You don't have to even hold your stomach as you get better at it, right? You can just, while you're paying attention, you can also pay attention to the rise and fall of your stomach, or with your breath, so. Okay, so that's a little bit on that abdominal breathing. Now, the 4 to 6 breathing is simply just when you notice your breath, and then maybe roughly, in proportion, maybe you spend about 4 seconds or so with in breath, and you spend a little bit longer on the out breath. Okay, so it doesn't have to be exactly 4 seconds or 6 seconds. It's just that you spend a little bit more time on the out breath, and that help you to sort of relax and help that parasympathetic nervous system to kind of kick in a little bit more. Okay, so you can, again, conscious breathing, and it just sort of put a little bit more attention on the out breath and let it be a little bit longer. And that can be relaxing for us. And some people find any kind of slow chanting or prayer can also be very soothing. Again, it's kind of, some of you are yawning, which is a good sign because it shows you're more relaxed. So you're probably always so busy. Your body is in that high gear, and that keeps you going. It's almost like you're drinking coffee all the time. Your body's in that state. But when you're actually doing something and you're yawning, it's actually a good sign that you're kind of some of the practices helping your body to slow down. So again, whether you have a spiritual practice that you can do, and again, I personally find, for example, chanting very soothing for my nervous system, because it's also something that's very, again, whatever your spiritual tradition is, again, it may be in sync with that, but also it's also, you hear a sound that's very soothing, that's very also predictable, that you're kind of doing, and again, it's also rhythmic. So to me, it's also very, very helpful, very soothing for me. The same thing for prayer. And some people find certain music can be also very soothing for our nervous system, right? And even just making certain sounds, again, that can also facilitate these long, slower exhalation. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes even taking short breaks during the day, because we are always on the go, and so you wonder why that when okay, now 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock or whatever time that it's your bedtime, 12 o'clock, and then you find that your body doesn't just unwind that quickly. So we may want to take subconsciously slow down our pace during the day. At least, you know, just kind of your car is driving really fast. You may want to press the brake a number of times for your car to sort of slow down, right? So you may want to do that during the day, not just you know, if you're not able to do that, being mindful of certain things throughout the day, you can do that during certain periods, and then to help you consciously slow down. Next slide, please. So Belinda, next slide, please. I know you're still practicing your reading techniques. So I won't spend too much time on all of these, but you know, some people talk about this strategy to immerse your face in cold water because it kicks in our dive reflex, which you know, again, researchers have found that if you're you know, happens to divers and ocean swimmers, and you know, I'm an ocean swimmer, so I you know, during the pandemic is actually being very helpful to swimming the ocean when gyms were closed and all that stuff, and it helps me a lot. And I learned later that, wow, you know, there's the dive reflex where this does help when you immerse your face in cold water and you hold your breath. It does help the, you know, your body and your mind to sort of get into a more relaxed state. And you know, because maybe you need that in order to be able to survive longer underwater. So there is a little bit of that reflex, but again, doesn't work for everyone. You know, some people hold a Ziploc bag with ice, etc. You can try that. But again, that's just one of the many different tools. Some people find, you know, just kind of bathing in the sun can be very relaxing, right? And this day and age, we know that that's a good source of vitamin B, which improve our immune system. It's good during pandemic times, and even taking a soaking hot bath. You know, some of us find that to be very relaxing. Massage and even laughter, right? So all these are very sort of just simple things, but it can help us to kind of kick in that relaxation response. So far, we talked more about actually, you know, you might be surprised, you know, Derek is from the Department of Mental Health. I'm talking actually not so much about the mental, it's all these sort of concrete things that you're doing at the behavioral level and things. But, you know, but these things are very concrete and very helpful. But also, what can also activate our parasympathetic nervous system is even simple things like think positive thoughts, or you're writing a gratitude journal, and you know, this can be also very relaxing for our body and mind. And just I mentioned earlier when we define stress, a stressor could be a situation, but it also could be a thought, right? A stressful thought kicking all these responses that we've been talking about. So conversely, if you have a positive thought, if you have these thoughts, for example, feeling grateful, things that you're grateful about, and it can also kick in the opposite, right? Instead of being really on guard, you help our body. And in fact, if you go to the next slide, so let me just talk a little bit about this gratitude journal, because researchers, particularly in positive psychology and neuroscience, they found that those that keep a daily gratitude journal really experience a higher level of emotional and physical well-being. And the finding is very robust. They repeat it in so many different research. So a simple practice like this can really increase our level of happiness, right? Because in a lot of times that, you know, we may find that our happiness fluctuate. When something good happens, we get a lot happier, and when something that happens, and you know, we become, you know, more unhappy, and we sort of fluctuate a little bit. But oftentimes, if people go back to sort of their baseline, and people may be at different baseline, right, for their general happiness. And this is one of the practices that can help to increase your baseline of happiness. Okay, so and the practice is very simple. So it may be each night before you go to sleep, or it could be in the morning. You can just write down at least 5 things that make you feel happy, or things that you sort of appreciate, things that you are grateful, things that that you appreciate, right? So it can be very simple things, small things, right? And you know, I mentioned this mindfulness of non-toothache, which I heard from Thich Nhat Hanh, which some of you know is a Vietnamese Buddhist monk that is credited to one of the person that brought mindfulness to the West, and who recently passed away, maybe 2-3 months ago. And one time he was giving this talk to a group of psychotherapists. He says, well, you guys deal with people's problems all the time, right? And so this practice is really important for you, this mindfulness of non-toothache. And what he was talking about is basically what we were talking about, our tendency to have this negativity bias, our nervous system. He didn't use those terms, but this is basically what he was saying. He says we have this tendency to pay so much more attention to all the things that are not going well, that are problems, things that are not well. But we often do not pay so much attention to the things that are not wrong, that are not necessarily a problem, that are all around us, but we don't really see them. We don't pay attention to them, as if it never happens. We have all these good things, right? And that's really not fair. And he gave some example. When you look at the sky, the blue sky, and he may smile at the sky or the clouds, and he's connecting with that, and he's paying attention to that and feeling grateful that he could actually have eyes to be able to see beautiful things that he has. He actually still have some teeth that he could still eat food, and some people don't have that. And or actually the example that he gave was, when all of us have experienced having a very intense toothache at one point, perhaps in our life, right? When we have a really, really, really painful toothache, if we remember that moment, it's so painful. And maybe in that moment, the only thing we can think about is, oh, I just wish this pain can go away. If this is, gone, this pain goes away, I'll be so much happier. I'll be so happy, right? We can relate to that. And yet most of us right now don't have this toothache, but we don't really pay attention to that, right? So in some ways, it's sort of unfair. And so the practice is then to pay attention to the fact that right now I don't have this toothache, and I can appreciate that. I can be grateful for that, right? So same thing you can apply to many other things, and the ability to have a roof over our head, to still have some loved ones that we care about, that we could still connect with. Some of us still have a job, right? And all the things that we can pay attention to and to appreciate, and to almost sort of connect our mind to that, right? To spend some time thinking about and connecting with and feeling grateful for. And it's almost like when you are savoring a good cup of coffee, you're down to the last drop, you're tasting it, and when you're writing this gratitude journal, you're recapping some of the things that you really appreciate during the day. And that's a very, probably makes you happy, happier during that time, because you're almost reliving a little bit that experience, something that you really enjoy and that you appreciate. And then that helps your body again to relax. It helps you to feel nourished by that. And we need to do more of that, because we have this tendency for this negativity bias, right? Our as I mentioned, we're geared for that. So we are already overdoing that part where we're so good at, and we're down to a science, we're so wired to do that. So we need to intentionally and deliberately engaging in some of these practices that can balance that part out. So by writing the gratitude journal, for example, and in my mind, I think that it also help us to rewire the brain, because as you have more practice because I do this too, and it's very helpful for me. And I notice that it's easier for me to notice the good things around me over time. We increase our ability to see things that are also good, that are also worth appreciating. And it's very nourishing, right? So therefore that helps us to increase our baseline of happiness. Okay, so I won't spend too much time. Let's go down to the next slide, please. So now that you're waiting for this happiness cocktail, okay, so this is the phrase that was used by Ben Shahar, who was a professor at Harvard, Department of Psychology. It was very popular. It was probably the most popular course at Harvard at one time. And he gave this series of lecture on positive psychology, or on the sort of basically on happiness. Okay, so I think his course is actually recorded on YouTube, and it's free, and it's I think it's maybe 20 or 30 1-hour sort of class. And during one of his classes, he talked about this happiness cocktail as sort of a couple of things that, you know, a lot of this is basing some of the research in positive psychology and simple things. So these different ingredients that can increase our level of happiness, our baseline of happiness. So one is exercise at least 30 minutes a day, at least 4 times a week, right? We know exercise is good for us, both for our mind and for our body. If you can do that consistently, at least 4 times a week, at least 30 minutes a day, that will increase, based on the research, increase our happiness. Very, very robust finding. Sleep at least around 7 to 8 hours a day. You know, it varies a little bit depending on individual, right? But in a ballpark, if you can get adequate sleep, that will also help our level of happiness. And there's a lot of research that go into that. It helps our ability to function and all that stuff. So sleep is very important. And as I mentioned, even if you have trouble sleeping, try to get into that routine. And then even laying on bed and doing that abdominal breathing. And then again, just try to get some adequate sleep over time. Work on that, which will be helpful for us. And then mindfulness practice, any kind of mindfulness practice, at least 15 minutes a day. Okay, so it could be that breathing exercise that we did. It could be, you know, the other breathing exercises that people may do, such as just paying attention to the breath going in and coming out. Just you're aware when the breath is going in your nose, you're aware when it's coming out. That's all. You can just sort of being aware of that happening as you sit or as you lie down, you know. So that's actually the mindfulness, one of the core mindfulness practices, mindfulness meditation. But there's many different mindfulness practices, and you can actually just do some search, and then there's a whole bunch. And toward the end, I'll share some resources where you can also get access to some of these guided practices as well. We talked about the gratitude journal, and lastly, the 12 hugs a day. Okay, that's also associated with greater happiness. So some of us may not be able to have that, and I mentioned that some of us in our culture, we don't necessarily get that from our parents, right? And then and whether we get it from a partner, or if we have a partner, right, we may not. And even during this day and age of the pandemic, with all the social distancing, all that, we don't get many hugs these days. But you can also hug yourself, okay? And the research on that is that our body will release, the same chemical that you experience when you hug yourself as you hug other people, the oxytocin that gets released. And it's also very nourishing. So you could actually do that, and then we'll talk a little bit about that as we have time. So that's the happiness cocktail for you. If you can try to do that will research have. Again, I'm not just making it up, or this is not just one of those self-help books, but it's based on rigorous science. and as well as many other things. So feel free to search that on YouTube, and I encourage you. And it actually has Chinese subtitle in some of the this course on the YouTube. So next slide, please. Belinda, next slide. So another thing just wanted to share is some of the more recent, there's a lot of research in neuroscience. I think historically, we as a field of psychology, as well as neuroscience, there's a tendency to focus more on the problems, as I mentioned earlier, right? So we have a lot more studies about depression, anxiety, PTSD, all these other things, but we don't have as much studies on happiness and well-being. But over the last, maybe 2 or 3 decades, we have gradually, our field has been shifting. We are beginning to paying more attention to the importance of understanding more about happiness and well-being. And also in neuroscience, they're doing more research in that area. And there's also all these physiological correlates of happiness and positive emotions, for example, right? So in one of the more recent articles from that line of research, for example, looking at positive emotions, which is very important to our happiness. Positive emotions, in some ways, are fundamental building blocks for cultivating resilience, our human flourishing and happiness and life satisfaction, right? So earlier when we talk about stress, and it seems like people may be in similar level of potentially having similar stressors or similar level of stress, but some people seem to be more resilient than others, right? And one of the research, when I mentioned earlier about the overactive, sympathetic nervous system, or that, HPA acts as this regulation. Again, what they have found earlier is that that's, when you have that dysregulation, it's associated with less resilience. So our ability to cope and be resilient in times of stress also has a whole lot to do with our ability to help our nervous system to be in more of that balance that we've been talking about. And also having positive emotions is also very helpful, okay, for our resilience. So that said, how can we have more positive emotions, right? And so some of the research have related to that, touched on, for example, there often is sort of a bidirectional influence between positive emotions and things like having social relationship and connectedness. And we know that human beings are social animals, and having these positive relationships and a sense of connectedness is very helpful, and is helpful for us to have more positive emotions. And having a sense of cognitive control, having just at the cognitive level, our ability to have some control over our thoughts, and in terms of ability to shift, for example, our focus. So instead of, let's say, almost getting kind of stuck at these negative thoughts and content, and the ability to shift and move to a different, frame of mind, for example, is associated with positive emotions. Engaging activities and being in certain environments can be associated with that, right? So, when talk about physical exercise, when you're out in nature, you're at parks, but it's also bi-directional in the sense that, let's say if you spend more time at the park, you're probably more likely to have some kind of social interactions with other people there. You're probably, rather than when you're just alone in your room, right? And when you're doing a lot of exercise, it helps you to feel, have more positive emotions, help you to be happier. But when you're more happy, when you have more positive emotions, you're probably more active too. So it's kind of directional. So and same thing with practices like meditation or other kind of contemplative practices. Like certain kind of prayer that it's also very contemplative. Contemplative. So I think in the Catholic tradition they have what's called the centering prayer, which is very similar to meditation. And again, there are different practices that are that are also associated with this. And the phenomenon of flow, I appreciate some of people share in the chat. When I walk my dog, I'm exposed to nature. I'm also etc. And it's definitely for sure, right? And on flow is basically this sort of positive emotional state where you're in this state where you have this optimal experience that that seems to be sort of very you're in this intensely focused state. Let's say you're in focusing on a particular task that really captivate your attention, and something that is intrinsically rewarding or valuable to you, and that you're just in that zone, right? You're in that zone. Some of us have experienced that. We call that state of flow, and that's also associated with positive emotions, but also positive emotion help us to be more in that. Yeah, some people share about some creative activities and art and etc. So again, also just focusing our attention on the present moment experiences. This is one of the article, I believe, published in the article of Science. So it's again, the research that go into this, I think it was even titled something like "A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind." So it sort of depicts the research that have gone into this, that our ability to be more in the present moment, for our mind to be able to do that. Again, it's a practice, help us to be happier. Next slide, please. So this is just sort of graphic from that article and sort of illustrate how some of these pieces sort of influence one another. And that sort of leads to happiness and well-being and vice versa. Okay, so next slide, please. So I intentionally want to talk a little bit about self-compassion, because not only of the research that have been so strong in both psychology and neuroscience, that, for example, some of the research show that this is even more powerful than self-esteem, particularly when we are faced with really hard, stuff, hard situations, when we're dealing with challenges, and it's even more powerful than many other factors in preserving our self-worth, in building resilience. And I think particularly it's relevant for, many of us from the AAPI background, because as mentioned earlier, early on, that I think within our culture, we have a tendency to have a lot of high expectations, right? For our, we may get it from our parents, we have it for ourselves, we may pass down to our kids. And then again, part of it is instrumental, it's helpful. It helps us to be very driven. It helps us to work really, really hard, right? And it helps us to achieve a lot. And it helps us to bring us to where we are. Many of you are very successful in what you do, in part because we push ourselves very hard. We have very high expectations of ourselves, standards that we hold ourselves to, right? And so in some ways, we tend to be harder on ourselves than we can be on our other people. Like personally, I definitely fall in that category. And I remember even for so many years, even in my school years, and I remember just, can notice that pattern where I'm just, some of the stress come from, I just, kind of have all these expectations, and and almost feel dreadful that if I don't do well with that paper or that exam or presentation, all the negative thoughts would come up in my mind and how stressed I get with that, right? And I think that the I guess part of it, the point I want to say is that it's critical that we learn to counteract that, or to balance that a little bit more with cultivate our ability to have self-compassion. Not only is it universally helpful for humans, but I think for us it's also even more important, because I think it's through over the years I found that I'm a little bit I've made progress in my ability to be more gentle with myself, to be kinder with myself, to be more tolerant with myself. And I also find that helps me to be happier, and I'm less anxious and stressed. So in general, I mean, again, there's times that I will still be stressed, but again, it's just much better than before when I was harder on myself. Now, how do we cultivate, or actually just, this is one of the researcher, Christine Neff, who did a lot of research at Berkeley on self-compassion. And she sort of categorized, or sort of these three core elements. And one is this element of self-kindness, which is in some ways just being really kind to ourselves. Like we would respond as if to ourselves as if we would to a dear friend, right? We can usually be kind to our friends. If our friends are having a hard time, we know the things to say. But when we are having a hard time, we can be our worst critic. And so it's learning to be relating to ourselves also in that kind way to ourselves. So some of the quotes can be that, yes, I heard, but I also feel care and concern. I'm both the comforter and the one in need of comfort, more than the pain I'm feeling right now. Right, I'm that heartfelt response to that pain, right? So you are, because by being kind to yourself, it's almost like when let's say that whatever the difficult emotion that you're experiencing, whether it's anger or sadness or pain, it can be that, let's say, a crying baby, right? And one time, Thich Nhat Hanh talked about that in his book related to calming the flames of anger. I think he used that metaphor of holding the anger as a little baby. It's like, okay, I see you're there, baby anger. I see that you're there. It's kind of like the mother holding the baby who's crying. You're paying attention to that pain. In that it's like to the baby, and is it you're holding, and is it because maybe the diaper is wet, maybe the baby's hungry, maybe it's too cold, and you're kind of paying attention, but then you're also holding and paying attention, and that also is very soothing for the baby, right? And so it's kind of that way that we are tending to whatever that difficult emotional experience that we are having. You're being aware, you're attending to it in that soothing way, you're responding to that pain as if you were to a friend. Okay, so that's that. Recognize our common humanity, and again, all of us we're humans. None of us are perfect. So accepting that imperfection, that humanness, that common humanity of us. The mindfulness part, again, sometimes we don't even notice that we are in a state of suffering, right? We are just constantly running and dealing with things. But sometimes it's helpful just to notice, wow, I'm Derek, I guess you're having a really hard time. This is a really hard moment, with all that's going on. This is really, really hard. And just taking that moment to be aware, to be mindful of how hard it is right now, is a gesture of self-compassion. Next slide, please. And then, and then some other additional practices. This is from the book called The Buddha's Brain. This is from Rick Hansen, who is a well-known neuroscientist who sort of describing very layman's term a lot of neuroscience research. And so he actually did some of this sort of, some of the specific practices that one of the practices on nurturing self-compassion. So for the sake of time, I'll let you kind of, kind of do that on your own time. But basically, these are just some suggestions that you can sort of, for example, prime your mind, recall being someone who really care for you, and then bring to mind those things, kind of warm yourself up for this practice. And then you extend that same compassion to yourself. And you can even use some physical gestures that maybe you can hold your body or hug yourself, like I mentioned earlier, or even just, caressing your hand if you can't hug yourself during a meeting or something. But again, just to convey in an even physical way that you are there to soothe yourself, that you care, you're responding like what we're saying earlier. And then you're open to that sense that you're receiving that compassion for yourself. Okay, and then let your senses sort of sink in. So that's some of the practices. Next slide, please. And I think this is just actually, before I go into the resources, just really quick, you can also maybe even do some search even in YouTube, for example, some practices on, for example, loving kindness meditation. Also known as metta, and it's very simple practice that you can do, and research is also very clear on that increases our happiness, and a lot of neuroscience research on that as well. So it can be very, very simple, and I know that we're a little bit short on time, so I'll just very briefly. And then if we have time, we at the very end, if you want, we can just even spend a minute. But again, the idea is that you basically hold some wishes for yourself. Like you said, may I be happy, may I be peaceful, may I be free from, from mental suffering, may I be free from physical suffering, And again, you can use those phrases or some other phrase like may I be at ease, that type of thing. And then something that feels right for you. But again, it's to convey to yourself, may I be this and be that, and you're wishing yourself, and you're really sort of try to feel that way when you do that. And then you extend that then gradually to others, to the circles around you, maybe your teachers and people that you respect, you care about, maybe to your friends and family, and then maybe you expand to the wider world. So that's one version of metta. So you can practice. You can look up things on YouTube. So here is the mental health resources. There's just a few of the resources. Again, it's important to know that there are resources out there. All of us do not. We don't have to deal with everything on our own. All of us, we need to lean on one another at times, right? And it's important to know there are people and sources of support that are out there. And sometimes the people around us may not be the right person to support us. Maybe they're actually part of what's going on, part of the stressor right now. And I just need to be able to talk to somebody, right? So, and sometimes we may be having a really hard time that even thoughts of suicide comes up. It's sometimes when it's not uncommon that when people have such a difficult time, when things are just so terrible and so painful, that wish I'm not here to deal with all this, right? So these thoughts may be normal to come up, and it's doesn't mean that we're going to act on that, but again, it's all these things are important for us to pay attention to, and whether we might act on it or we may not act on it. It's helpful to know there, for example, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline that's 24/7 that you can call and talk to somebody, and to get some support and to kind of talk it through, even if it's not something that you may feel that comfortable talking to a friend. There's also good to know the disaster distress helpline. That's a part of SAMHSA's helplines. That's also 24/7, dealing with all these different natural as well as man-made disasters and getting some support. Crisis text line, LA Warm Line basically is a line that people can call between the hours of 10 o'clock at night to 6 o'clock in the morning, just to get some support. And some people may be very lonely, they can't sleep, and just to be able to talk to somebody on if they feel lonely. But it's not typically deal with people who are in a really major crisis. I would suggest more of the suicide prevention lifeline for that. The LA County DMH helpline, our access line, is a great source of resource and support for referrals, as well as if you need to request for a crisis team. That's whether it may be for your family member or for a friend or for somebody that you know is in a mental health crisis. Maybe that they're actively suicidal or going through a suicidal crisis. Maybe they're actually, hearing voices or telling them to do things, or they're, again, mental health concerns that is creating a immediate safety concern. And those are situations that you can call that 800 number at Access, and they will dispatch a team to the home, to the school, to wherever the location the person is at, and to do an evaluation. Some people ask if there's language capability. Yes. So for example, with the DMH access line, as well as any of the other lines, if they do not have a person that can speak that language, they will use a translation service to be able to do that. So I understand that sometimes it may not be, it may not always be as smooth and easy as if it's in the person's direct language. I recognize that, but at least they have the ability to use that with any language and to be able to communicate through an interpreter. The DMH link also has a searchable function where you can just type in the zip code and you can bring up all the mental health and substance abuse treatment programs around you based on the zip code. So next slide, please. And this is just also some of the resources for county employees, like, as you know, EAP. Also, some of you may not know about the employee wellbeing line. There's also these other additional resources that are free to county employees. And it's important to know that these are also available to provide some extra support. And some of the wellbeing for LA.org has a lot of recorded webinars on ways to cultivate more well-being, etc. Things, topics that we talk about. Headspace is a free app that LA County DMH have already paid for the subscription, so you could actually access that. A lot of good guided meditations and techniques on relaxation, etc. So worth to take a look. Next slide, please. And this, some of you are maybe from children's, some of you may be women's, and etc. But there are, again, these different tools that these programs have developed, these free phone apps that a lot of, again, guided meditations and other things that can be very helpful, as well as other tools. Next slide, please. So again, additional phone apps that could be worth taking a look and can be very useful. Next. So as I already mentioned about Headspace, again, you can check it out. Next slide. And there's also the latest new addition to our DMH resources, something called I Prevail, which is like an online platform free to LA County residents, where you can actually sign up and you can actually get connected to a life coach, and that will help you to sort of work on your life goals. And you can meet with them on a weekly basis, for example. All this is free of charge. And so this is something very new that we are just we are paying the private sector. This is a company that have developed this tool, and we have this contract with them, so they're actually running this. So that's next slide, please. So I think that is the end of our presentation today. I apologize that we don't have a lot of time left for questions, but I hope some of this information is useful for you. And I don't know if we potentially can stay on. I'd be happy to answer more questions for those of you that would like to stay on. So, but again, I hope some of this information is useful. And I know that all of us are going through challenging times, and these are particularly unsettling times for all of us. So I really admire that you're taking the time to try to learn more things that might be useful. And I really would encourage you to try out some of these practices and to learn more about this. This is just the beginning of learning in this area. And I encourage you to actually try to incorporate and build into your daily or weekly or monthly routine some of these practices that can really help you to increase your well-being and your happiness. Okay. All right. Take care, everybody. I hope maybe we'll have a chance to meet again, and but I'll be here to stay for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Xie, for that presentation. And I know some people have to leave. That's okay. But I just want to follow up with some stuff. Because when you were mentioning the rewiring your brain, that reminded me of something that I learned about a long time ago, and it's always stayed with me. And it's the idea of the neuroplasticity of the brain. And it's basically like your experience of the world and your repeated behavior can actually change your brain. So you said that stress is cumulative, but so is good practices, right? Self-care and meditation, all those things are cumulative. So if you keep doing them over time, it's gonna have a positive change on your brain, and you're gonna feel happier. You're gonna be calmer and be more resilient to stress.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. Winnie should be my co-presenter on that. Yeah, so you said it very well. And there's so much research on that, again, these practices actually does change the, at the biochemical level of the brain, right? And also change even the structure of the brain. Some of these, for example, mindfulness practices, loving kindness meditation, for example, and even exercise and all these other things that we touched on, right? And even the environment, because when they do even animal research, and they found that, these animals in these so-called enriched environments, if they have games for these monkeys or rats to play, right, it also changes their brain. So our, like you said, the brain can be plastic in the sense that it's malleable. It can, and even repeated thoughts and repeated activities and behavior can change, build new pathways. It's like when you're walking, you're hiking. Some of you may like to hike, and you're hiking, continually going on the same trail, walking on the grass, and you walk on that enough, and it become more and more becoming like a path, right? And the more you walk, it become a bigger road, kind of, and it's easier then to walk, to follow that path. The same thing with our brain. So the more that we do the gratitude journal, for example, the easier then for our brain to go there.
Yeah. So I remember when I first learned about it, I was so excited, because despite all the things that we have to deal with in our daily lives, we actually have more control than we think. And it's through these little practices that we do every day that, you can really change yourself for the better.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. And the other question I wanted to ask is, how do we, when we see someone who is extremely stressed out, how do we convince them to seek out help? Especially for the Asian communities, where we see stress as or we see mental health problems as a weakness. You know, how do we convince them to open up to getting help?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a really good question, Winnie. And I think you hit it on the nail, that this is something that's very difficult for our community, right? And I think that culturally we have such a tendency to try not to, because I think with Asians, we almost are hypersensitive to shame, right?
Yeah.
We don't want to bring our dirty laundry outside of our family or our close circles. And it's challenging. It's very difficult, and there's very clear patterns and it's a challenge that we face in our field. How do we continue to face that challenge to get more AAPI individuals to even utilize public mental health services, because we are the race and ethnic group that utilize the public mental health services the least compared to all other racial and ethnic groups, even in LA County. And that continues despite some efforts. So, but I think that, one of the things that if you're facing that situation with either friends or family, etc., I think that even just starting with just, connecting with them, just being a supportive presence, being a good friend, being a caring family member, first of all, will give you more basically influence. Because if you don't have a good connection and relationship, they're less likely to also follow any advice that you might have. So first of all, there's already a lot of benefit just by virtue of you being a supportive presence, of being having a supportive relationship. Even if they don't want to go, you respect that. But again, you're still there being supportive.
Mm-hmm.
But then at the same time, it is helpful to, even simple things as much as we can convey that, sometimes that this, we all need to lean on one another. We all need to, to get some support. It actually could be a sign of strength or health when we are actually able to recognize we're in this state of pain, or we're in this state of intense stress that's even affecting our ability to function very well at work or in our important relationships, and it's having an impact on us. And when we talk about being resourceful, and it's important to know what resources we could potentially utilize to help our life to be better, to make it easier for us to be able to do better with our life, to right? It would almost be irrational to when there's resources available and we're not being resourceful to utilize that to help to make our life better. So yeah. It's a sign of, you can maybe, I don't know if that would work, you can say it's actually a really it's a sign of self-help, or being having the ability to a high emotional intelligence to be able to recognize that you actually can have going through a hard time and can benefit from some of the available resources that may be available to help our life to get better. So to whatever extent, and if that still does not work, again, we can just plant the seeds and we can still continue to be in their life. And then if when it gets to a situation when things are really crosses the line, when there's real safety issues, let's say when this person really need help, but they refuse, but then they're getting to a point where they're having thoughts about taking their own lives. You're seeing changes, some of the warning signs, for example, that they're talking about, they wish they can go to sleep, they don't want to wake up, they wish that they, they're actually thinking about doing this and doing that, or maybe they're actually already making some plans or giving away some prized possessions. They're saying goodbyes. So I may not see you again. Again, some of these are warning signs for maybe suicide, right? So if you're actually in a situation where somebody that you are in your life is in that state of crisis or potential safety situation, you want to reach out for help, such as the 1-800-854-7771 number, the DMH access line, and can get a team to go and to talk to that person and to assess how dangerous the situation is, because those teams are able to initiate what we call an involuntary hospitalization. So if the danger is really, really high, okay, normally in the US, the rights to choose whether you want treatment or not is protected by law, right? You have the right to decide if you want to get treatment or not. Even if you're going to die from cancer, you can still decide you don't want treatment. Similar with mental health, right? You can't force somebody to get treatment. But if it gets to a point when their immediate safety is at risk or somebody else's safety is at risk, then you can actually get, potentially these teams are designated to initiate involuntary hospitalization. They can actually put the person into the hospital if the risk is so high that they're likely to die from, for example, in the next couple of days, if nothing is done to it, then they have the legal authority to get them to the hospital, and they'll make all the arrangements. So that's why that those resources are important. And if you need to utilize that, you do that even on behalf of somebody who doesn't want the help, but they truly need the help. Otherwise, they may be immediate safety, life's risk. Okay.
Mm-hmm.